Snow was falling thick and quiet across New York that night, covering everything like a soft, white blanket. The wind slipped between buildings with a sharp hiss, cutting through coats and warming layers, chilling right down to the bone. Michael Reynolds, 32, walked out of a tall glass tower on Park Avenue, his face tense from a long, stressful business meeting. Everyone knew him as the youngest CEO ruling Wall Street, a man who built his empire on logic, numbers, and keeping feelings far away. But tonight, something inside him pushed back. He ignored the luxury car waiting at the curb. Instead, he waved off his driver and decided to walk, hoping the freezing air would clear his mind. He turned onto a quiet side street near his hotel, the snow crunching under his shiny leather shoes. That's when something under a flickering street lamp caught his eye. A small shape curled up on a metal bench at an old bus stop. He stopped. It was a child. Michael stepped closer, his breath forming clouds in the frozen air. The little girl looked no older than 4. She was huddled beneath a big, worn-out coat, wearing only a thin dress underneath. Her tangled hair framed a tiny face, cheeks red from the cold, lips already turning blue. She looked like she was sleeping, or trying to. Panic shot through him. Without thinking, he crouched beside her and gently touched her shoulder. "Hey, do you have a home?" he asked softly. "It's freezing. Let me take you somewhere warm. Come with me." The girl stirred, her eyes slowly opening, surprisingly clear, wide, and calm. She looked at him without fear, without surprise, just pure trust. "My mommy went to find dinner. But I'm not scared. You're here now. You're the miracle, right?"
Michael froze. That word, miracle, hit him like a wave. She said it like it was fact, like she had been waiting just for him. He didn't know what to say. In his world, belief didn't matter. Results did. But here, now, that one word from a little girl wrapped in frost shook him deeper than any investor ever had. The girl sat up a little and reached into her old backpack. She pulled out a wrinkled photograph and held it toward him. "This is my mommy," she said. "She said she'd be back before the snow covers my shoes." Michael looked down. Snow was already starting to pile on the edges of her tiny sneakers. Something twisted in his chest. He didn't speak. Instead, he took off his heavy wool coat and gently wrapped it around her small body. She snuggled into it right away, like it was the warmest blanket in the world. "What's your name?" he asked after a pause. "Laura," she whispered, curling deeper into the coat. Michael nodded, unsure what else to say. She looked at her feet again. "Me and Mommy stay here sometimes," she added. "It's not too bad. The light helps me sleep." Michael looked around. No mom, no one nearby, just the howling wind and falling snow. He thought about calling someone, a shelter, the police, anyone. But he didn't. Instead, he sat down, right there beside her. The freezing wind bit through his dress shirt now, with his coat wrapped around her. But Laura seemed calmer next to him, like just having him there made the bench a little warmer. "Do you really think I'm a miracle?" he asked finally, his voice quiet. Laura slowly nodded. "Mommy says miracles are people who show up when no one else does." Michael stared into the falling snow, his breath shaky. For the first time in years, he felt something cracking inside him, something cold and locked away. So he stayed, just a man and a little girl waiting in the snow, and not knowing that within moments her mother would return, and nothing in his life would ever be the same again.
Ava pulled her scarf tighter around her face as the wind howled through the alley next to the soup kitchen. Snow clung to her eyelashes. Her fingers were numb. The small paper bag she carried was already wet from the falling snow. Inside were 2 small containers of warm rice porridge and 1 bread roll. That was dinner for her and Laura. She walked quickly, her boots slipping a little on the icy sidewalk. She was tired. So tired. She had been gone longer than she meant to. The line at the soup kitchen had stretched around the block, and by the time she got inside, the volunteers were already packing up. But she smiled anyway. Always polite, always thankful. That was her rule. Never beg, never demand, just survive. Ava was 28. Once, she had been a quiet dreamer who loved cooking and experimenting with flavors. She'd worked as a line cook at a cozy little bistro in Brooklyn. But then the pandemic hit. The restaurant shut down. Bills piled up. The eviction notice came. And suddenly, her life flipped upside down. Now, she was just a mom, doing whatever it took to protect her daughter in a world that didn't seem to care. Her pace quickened as she turned onto the block where the old bus stop stood. She had chosen that spot carefully. It was near a hospital, meaning bright lights, a camera, and a shelter nearby where she could sometimes use the bathroom or get a blanket. The bench had a little cover from snow. If Laura curled up tight, she could sleep there. But tonight, the moment Ava turned the corner, she stopped. Her heart slammed in her chest. There was a man, sitting next to Laura. He wasn't holding her, but he was very close, and his expensive coat, it was wrapped around Laura. Laura was sitting upright now, her small hands tucked inside the sleeves, listening like she was hearing a bedtime story. The man's voice was soft, calm, like a lullaby. Ava dropped the bag, ran forward, and grabbed her daughter. "Laura!" she shouted, panic sharp in her voice. She scooped her child into her arms, holding her tight, shielding her with her own body. The man stood up fast, but didn't move toward them. His hands went up right away. "I'm not here to hurt her. She was alone, cold. I just stayed with her." Ava stepped back, her eyes locked on his face. He looked clean, young, serious. She didn't see danger in his eyes, but that didn't mean she trusted him. "You don't get to touch someone's child just because they look cold," she snapped, holding Laura tighter. "I didn't touch her," he said calmly. "I gave her my coat and sat with her. She said you were coming back. I was going to wait until you did." Laura stirred in her arms and smiled sleepily. "Mommy, he's nice. He stayed with me. He's warm, like cocoa." Ava looked down at her daughter. She wasn't shivering anymore. Her cheeks had more color. Ava looked at the man again. "Who are you?" she asked. "My name's Michael. I was just walking by, that's all." He didn't ask for his coat back. He didn't move, just stood there in a dress shirt, snowflakes landing on his shoulders, hands still up. Ava studied him closely. His eyes didn't look empty or cruel, just tired, like hers. Still, she said nothing. "I can leave if you want, but maybe let her keep the coat, just for night." Ava looked down at Laura, still wrapped in the thick wool. She was so small inside it, but peaceful, like she belonged there. Ava let out a slow breath. "No," she said. "You can stay. For now." Her voice was firm.
Just don't try anything." "I won't," Michael said softly. He nodded. "I understand." He sat back down, but this time at a respectful distance. Ava stayed standing for a moment, then slowly sat too, Laura safe in her lap between them. Snow kept falling. The world went quiet.
The snow kept falling, soft and quiet around them. For a long time, nobody spoke. Ava held Laura close, her arms wrapped tightly around her. She sat like a shield between her daughter and the world. Her voice had softened, but her body was still tense, ready to protect, ready to run if needed. Michael sat nearby, silent, respectful. He didn't try to get closer. He just stayed. Calm. Still. There. Snowflakes danced in the air, landing gently on the sidewalk. Everything was hushed. After a while, Ava looked at him again. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for staying." Michael gave a small nod. "No thanks needed. I just didn't want her to be alone." Ava lowered her eyes. "That's kind of you, but kindness usually comes with a price. I've learned that." Michael tilted his head slightly. "Not always." Ava didn't answer. She just held Laura tighter. Michael hesitated for a moment, then spoke again. "I'm staying at a hotel nearby. It's warm, clean. You and your daughter could stay there tonight. Just one night. You'd be safe." Ava's eyes snapped at him, sharp, suspicious. "And then what? We wake up owing you something? A bill? A favor?" Michael shook his head gently. "You won't owe me anything." Ava let out a small, bitter laugh. "That's what they all say. But nothing is ever free." Michael didn't argue. Instead, he looked down at his own hands, quiet, thoughtful. "You're right to be cautious. I respect that." He stood up slowly, brushing the snow from his sleeves. "There's a budget motel 4 blocks from here. No one will bother you there. I'll pay for the night, anonymously. The front desk won't mention my name." He looked her in the eye. "After that, you decide what's next."
Ava narrowed her eyes. Her voice was sharp. "Why would you do that?" Michael looked straight at her. "Because I can," he said quietly. "And because I want to." That answer stunned her. She didn't know what to say. Finally, after a long pause, she gave a slow, cautious nod. "Okay," she said, "just for tonight." He didn't smile, he didn't push. He just nodded and waited, while she gently lifted Laura into her arms. The heavy coat was still wrapped around her like a warm cocoon. The 3 of them began walking down the snowy sidewalk. They didn't say much on the way, just the sound of footsteps in snow. The city lights shimmered softly behind them. Laura was half asleep in Ava's arms, her small head resting against her chest. Then, in the quiet, Laura stirred. She whispered, "I like him, Mommy. He makes the air feel warm."
At the motel, Michael walked up to the front desk. He spoke quietly to the clerk, keeping his voice low and calm. He paid for a room without giving his name. Just one night, no questions. Then he turned to Ava and gently handed her the room key. "You'll be safe here," he said softly. Ava nodded. Her voice was almost a whisper. "Thank you. Really?" Michael started to leave. He turned toward the door, his heart full of something he couldn't name. But just as he reached for the handle, he felt a small tug at the sleeve of his coat. He looked down. It was Laura. She stood there in the hallway light, eyes wide and shining, her tiny hand gripping his coat. "Will you come back tomorrow?" she asked in a quiet voice. "I still have more of the miracle story to tell." Michael felt something tighten deep in his chest. He crouched down to her level, met her eyes, and smiled gently. "I'll try. I'd like to hear it." She grinned, satisfied. Then she turned and ran back to her mother's side, the coat still wrapped around her like a hug. Michael stepped outside. The snow had slowed. The city sparkled in soft white. He stood there for a moment, under the cold sky, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Something real. The next morning, Michael sat in his office. A fresh coffee sat untouched on his desk, slowly turning cold. But his mind wasn't on meetings, reports, or numbers. He couldn't stop thinking about them, Ava and little Laura. He saw Ava's eyes in his mind, the way she sat on that bench, holding her daughter like a shield. She had been so calm, so strong, even though life had been so unfair. She didn't beg, she didn't cry, she just protected. Michael didn't know why, but he couldn't stop thinking about her. Finally, he picked up the phone and called his assistant. "I need some quiet background info," he said. "Her name is Ava, around 28 or so. She has a daughter named Laura. I think she used to work in food." He paused. Nothing invasive. No police, no digging. Just who she is. His assistant didn't ask questions. She never did. That afternoon, a file appeared in his inbox. It was simple, clean. Ava Bennett, 28. Former line cook at a small family-owned restaurant in Brooklyn. The place shut down during the pandemic. No criminal record. One eviction on file. No permanent address. Sometimes visits shelters and soup kitchens in Midtown. She'd lived a good, honest life. No drama, no trouble. Just someone the world had quietly pushed aside. Michael stared at the screen for a long time. Then he closed the file and leaned back in his chair, silent. The next evening, Michael didn't go home. Instead, he walked downtown, to the community kitchen. It was one of the places his company quietly helped fund, but he had never visited before. Now he stood outside, near the entrance, his coat collar turned up to block the wind. Through the frosted glass, he saw her, Ava. She was wearing a borrowed apron and an oversized sweater. Her hair was tied back in a loose bun. She moved like she belonged there, focused, graceful. She chopped vegetables with steady hands, stirred a giant pot of stew, ladled warm bowls of food for people who looked tired, cold, forgotten. But it wasn't just the way she worked, it was the way she treated people. She smiled gently at each person, gave a nod, said a kind word, washed her hands between each step, and she never served herself before the line was empty. Later, when the kitchen began to quiet, Ava sat in the back on a plastic crate, sipping tea from a paper cup. Michael finally stepped inside. She looked up, surprised. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I didn't mean to interrupt." Ava set her cup down slowly. She was calm but cautious. "What are you doing here?" "I help fund this place," Michael said simply. "I wanted to see how it's doing." She raised an eyebrow. "And now you've seen?" Michael paused, then said, "You're good at this." I used to cook, before all of this." "I could help," he offered gently. "Just a small stipend. Make it official. Not charity. Something steady." Ava shook her head. "I'm not looking for a handout." "It's not charity," Michael said. "It's seeing your worth." She looked at him for a long time, trying to read him. Then she gave a small nod. "Fine, I'll cook, but on my terms." That night,
She stayed late to prep for the next day. Michael lingered, pretending to check his phone, but really just watching her work. Something about it calmed him, like watching someone create a little bit of peace in a messy world. Later, when the kitchen began to quiet, Ava left through the back door. He quietly followed, just far enough behind to not be seen. She didn't go straight home. She turned a corner and stopped beside an old man, slumped under a blanket in an alleyway. He was shivering hard, lost in the cold. Ava knelt down beside him, whispered something kind, and took out a small container of food from her bag. Leftovers. She placed it gently in his hands. Then, without thinking twice, she took off her coat and wrapped it around him. Michael stopped walking. He stood still in the falling snow, hidden by the dark, and watched her. He heard her soft voice as she adjusted the coat. People shouldn't die cold, even if they've made mistakes. Michael didn't say a word. He just stood there, frozen, not from the cold, but from what he saw. Her care, her courage, her heart. And in that moment, he thought of his mother. She had been a nurse, gentle, selfless, always sitting beside people no one else wanted to help. She had died too young. But now, here in front of him, was that same spirit, that same kindness. Ava didn't know he was watching, and Michael realized something had changed in him. He had come here curious, but now he was something else entirely. Moved.
As winter settled deeper over the city, Michael found himself doing something he had never done before. He started going outside, on purpose. Not for meetings, not for show, but for something more real. It began one night after the kitchen closed. Ava was packing leftover food into paper containers, her movements quiet and practiced. Michael stood beside her and asked softly, "Do you mind if I come with you?" She looked at him, unsure if he was serious. "To deliver these," he added gently, picking up one of the bags. Ava studied him for a long second, then handed him a box. "You'll need gloves," she said, "and maybe a little humility." That night changed everything. It became a routine, a quiet mission. After every evening at the kitchen, the two of them would pack up hot meals and head out, on foot, into the freezing city. They walked through alleys, subway entrances, under bridges, forgotten places most people avoided. Places where people lived, hiding from the cold, the shame, the fear. Many of the people they helped were too scared to even come into the soup kitchen, but Ava knew where to find them, and Michael followed. He watched her kneel in slush and snow without hesitation. She placed food in people's hands like it was gold, and always she looked them in the eye. That's what amazed him most. She didn't rush. She didn't look away. She saw them, every single person, and she said, "Thank you." Even when she was the one giving, even when the other person didn't say a word. Michael felt it every time, deeply. It wasn't just kindness Ava was giving. It wasn't pity. It was something stronger. It was dignity.
One cold night, as they walked down a narrow alley behind an old train station, Michael asked a question that had been sitting in his heart for days. "Why do you always look at them like that?" he said softly, "even when they won't look back?" Ava stopped walking. She looked at him, then turned her eyes to the shadowy street ahead. "Because someone needs to," she said.
I want them to know they're seen, that they still matter." Her words were quiet, but they hit him hard. Michael didn't answer right away. He couldn't. He just nodded slowly, his breath misting in the cold air. That moment settled deep inside him, heavier than anything he had ever carried in a boardroom. A quiet respect began to grow. Not because she was loud, not because she asked for it, but because Ava lived with a kind of strength he had never known. One that didn't shout, but showed. And every time she knelt to hand someone food, every time she smiled at someone who hadn't been smiled at in years, every time she stayed gentle in a world that hadn't been kind to her, Michael felt himself change, bit by bit, without even realizing it.
As the days went by, their walks grew longer. So did their talks. One quiet evening, on the way back from deliveries, Ava shared something she hadn't told anyone in years. She talked about her childhood, about a dad who left when she was small, about a mom who worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table, about the tiny apartment that always smelled like soup. "I've spent most of my life feeling invisible," she said softly. "Maybe that's why I notice the people no one else sees." Michael stayed silent for a while. Then, in a voice she'd never heard before, low, careful, almost afraid, he told her his story too. He spoke of losing his mother when he was just 12, how the world told him he had to be tough, fast, smart. So that's what he became. He built an empire, but somewhere along the way, he traded his softness for sharpness. And now all that success felt like it belonged to someone else. "You built something huge," Ava said gently, "but maybe what you needed was something to come home to." Later that night, they found themselves back in the kitchen, cleaning up together. It was warm, filled with the scent of herbs and soap. As Ava wiped the counters, Michael tried to help, but ended up spilling a full tray of water across the table. Ava yelped and tossed a dish towel at him, laughing for real this time. Laura, sitting nearby with her crayons, giggled so hard she nearly tipped over her juice cup. "You're terrible at cleaning," Ava said between laughs. Michael smiled sheepishly. "Shocking, I know. I've only ever cleaned up market crashes." The room filled with warmth, not from the heat, but from laughter. For the first time, it felt like they weren't just helping others, they were healing each other too.
That night, as they were leaving, Laura threw her arms around Michael's waist in a big, peppermint sticky hug. "Good night, Mr. Snowman," she whispered. Michael blinked, a little surprised. "Snowman?" Laura giggled. "Because you came with the snow, and you always bring minty candy." Michael reached into his pocket, pulled out a peppermint, and handed it to her with a smile. "Well, I guess I have a name to live up to now." What Michael didn't tell Laura or Ava was what he had done that very morning. Earlier that day, while flipping through some property files for his company's charity wing, something caught his eye. It was a small listing, a closed-down cafe space in Midtown. Nothing flashy, just a quiet little building. But it was solid, cozy, full of potential. The kind of place that could smell like fresh bread in the morning. The kind of place that could sound like people sharing stories over soup. Without second guessing, Michael bought it. No press, no meetings, no name on the paperwork. Just a silent decision with Ava in his heart.
That night, as she stood beside him in the kitchen talking about how much she missed real cooking, not just ladling stew, he didn't say a word. But in his mind, he could already see it. A warm stove, a chalkboard menu in Ava's neat handwriting, the clink of cups, the sound of laughter, the smell of cinnamon and home, and a name floating in his mind like a promise, the Hearth.
It happened on a regular afternoon. At least, it started out that way. Ava had come in early to prep dinner at the community kitchen. She stood in the back, chopping carrots, the knife thudding gently against the board, the smell of garlic and onions already filling the room. That's when she heard a voice. Michael's voice. He was in the front hallway, talking on the phone. She didn't mean to eavesdrop. She didn't even move at first. But then, she heard her name. "We've finalized the purchase," Michael said quietly. "The Hearth will open on schedule." A pause. "And yes, keep the foundation's name on it. No need to mention me." Ava still doesn't know. Ava froze. The knife slipped from her hand, hitting the counter with a sharp clack. Her breath caught. Michael Reynolds. It all hit her at once. The name she'd heard before in passing, in the news, in whispered conversations at the shelter. The powerful man with cold eyes and a billion-dollar company, and he had been here all along, washing dishes, handing out soup, smiling gently, lying. She stepped into the hallway just as Michael hung up the call. Their eyes locked. He took a step forward. "Ava, wait." "You lied to me." Her voice wasn't loud, but it shook. "This whole time?" "I didn't lie," Michael said quickly. "I just didn't tell you everything." She stared at him, heart pounding. "That's not better." "I wasn't trying to trick you," he said. "I just wanted to be real around you. Not my title, not my money, just me." She shook her head slowly. "It's not about your title, Michael. It's about why you came, why you stayed, why you helped." He opened his mouth, but she cut him off. "You made me feel like I mattered, like I earned it. But now, I feel like I was just another project." "No," he said, voice rough. "You weren't." "Don't," she said, stepping back. "You can give me a house, a kitchen, a paycheck, but don't take my dignity. Don't pretend I need you just to survive." The words hit harder than any deal he'd ever lost. Before he could say another word, she turned. She pulled off her apron and walked out the door. Michael stood alone in the now quiet kitchen. He looked around at the pots, the trays, the stove still warm. But everything felt cold, empty. That night, he returned to his penthouse. It had everything: views of the skyline, sleek furniture, perfect silence. But it had never felt lonelier. For the next 3 days, Michael moved through his life like a shadow. He ignored emails, missed meetings, didn't answer calls. And every morning, he found himself walking back to the place where it all began. That old bus stop, hoping somehow he'd see a little girl in a big coat. But she was never there. He even stood outside the kitchen once,
just to feel close, just to hear something. But there was no laughter, no clatter, no Ava. He tried to tell himself it had been about charity, about giving, but he knew better. He hadn't stayed all those nights because he wanted to help. He had stayed because her steadiness had become his anchor. And now that she was gone, he was drifting.
One evening, Michael packed a bag of leftover meals himself. No assistants, no cameras, just him. He stepped out into the cold night and followed the same path he and Ava used to take together. Through the alleys, down quiet corners, past the church steps where Ava always left extra blankets. He searched for the people she had never stopped seeing. But tonight, there was no one. At the very last stop, on the stillest street of all, he stood under a flickering street lamp, alone. Snow swirled around him. The wind cut through his coat like it wasn't even there. He closed his eyes and remembered her voice. "I don't need to be saved. I just want to feel like a person." He opened his eyes slowly, looked up at the sky as snowflakes landed on his lashes. And then, barely above a whisper, he said, "I didn't save her." He let the words hang in the cold air, then said something even softer. "She saved me." Because the truth hit him in that moment. It hadn't been her struggles that changed him. It was how she refused to let them define her. It was her strength in silence, her calm in chaos, the way she gave warmth, dignity, and kindness without ever asking for anything in return. She didn't wait to be rescued. She just kept showing up, heart first. And he had fallen in love with that. Not because she needed him, but because she didn't, and he needed her.
The kitchen was busy again. You could hear the soft clatter of pots, spoons tapping against pans, quiet voices of volunteers finishing the last round of meals. But when Michael walked in that night, everything slowed. No one said a word. He didn't ask permission. He didn't speak at all. He just walked quietly to the far end of the room and sat down on the same stool where he used to sit beside her. The air smelled like ginger and soup. It reminded him of warmth, not the kind that came from heat, but the kind that came from her. People around him whispered. They all knew who he really was now, but tonight that didn't matter. Tonight, he wasn't a CEO. He was just a man, waiting. Minutes passed, and then Ava walked out from the back, holding a steaming bowl in her hands. Her hair was loosely tied back, a few soft strands falling around her face. She didn't rush, she didn't smile, she said nothing. She simply placed the bowl down in front of him. "Eat," she said quietly. "I added extra ginger. It's cold out." Michael looked up at her, right into her eyes. He reached for the spoon, then stopped. His voice low, full of truth, he said, "I don't know when it started. Maybe it was the night I saw you give your last bowl of soup to someone who couldn't even look you in the eye." He swallowed. "Or maybe it was when you laughed that one time, even though I knew you hadn't slept in days." He looked at her with soft eyes. "But somewhere along the way, I stopped coming here to help. I came here because I needed you." Ava didn't speak, but her lips trembled. She blinked hard once, twice, fighting emotion. Michael kept going, voice steady. "I've spent my life chasing numbers, making decisions I could control. But now,
Nothing tastes right unless it's made by you. Ava looked away for a second, then back at him. And finally, softly, she said, "Then don't leave again." She took a deep breath. "I never needed someone to bring me miracles. I just needed someone who'd stay, even when it's hard. Especially then." Michael stood slowly. He stepped closer. His voice dropped even lower. "I'm staying, not out of guilt, not because you need saving. I'm staying because of you, because you're the one thing I didn't know I was missing." He reached out, not rushing, just resting his hand gently on the edge of the counter between them. And Ava? She placed her hand over his. Their fingers intertwined. And in that small, quiet moment, they didn't need to say anything else. Everything was understood.
From the doorway behind them, a tiny voice whispered, "Told you he'd come back, Mommy?" Laura stood there with a giant grin, hugging her stuffed bear to her chest. Michael and Ava turned toward her at the same time, smiling. On the counter, the soup sat untouched, steam rising in soft little curls between them. But in that moment, they didn't need food to feel full. They had something else. Each other. 1 year later, winter returned to New York. But this time, it felt different. Gentler, softer, warmer. At the edge of the city, tucked between old buildings and brand new hope, stood a place called Hearth Village. It wasn't just a shelter, it was a second chance. Made of bricks and love and dreams that refused to stay small, Hearth Village had it all. A big kitchen that smelled like fresh bread, a cozy classroom for learning, gardens where people planted more than vegetables, they planted new beginnings, a reading corner full of laughter, and a playground where kids ran wild and free, their laughter ringing like bells. At the heart of it all, Ava. Now head chef and program director, she moved through the kitchen like she always had, with kindness, strength, and quiet grace. But now she had a team behind her and a future in front of her. Laura, now 5, wore a bright yellow sash that read, "Ambassador of Smiles," and she took it very seriously. She greeted every visitor with her famous giggle and a pocket full of peppermints. On the day Hearth Village opened, the hall was packed. Donors, old shelter friends, new families. People who once had nothing, now standing tall, full of hope. Michael stepped onto the stage. He wasn't wearing a suit, just a wool coat, shirt collar open, and eyes scanning the crowd gently. He reached for the microphone, but before he could speak, a small blur ran past the curtain. "Wait!" It was Laura, rushing to join him. She stood proudly beside him, holding a toy microphone in both hands. The room chuckled. Then she turned to the crowd and said clearly, "This is my dad." Michael blinked, stunned. She wasn't finished. "People say he's a miracle, but he's not." He looked at her, unsure what come next. Then she smiled wide. "He's my dad now. I wished for him a long time ago, and he came." The room fell completely silent. Then, soft laughter, applause, and tears. So many quiet tears. From the side of the stage, Ava watched. One hand covered her mouth, the other pressed gently to her chest. Her eyes sparkled in the warm light. Michael turned to Laura and knelt beside her. He whispered, "You know what, kiddo? I think I wished for you, too." That night, after the music faded and the guests went home, the three of them walked hand in hand back to their little cottage just behind the hearth's garden. It had wooden floors, spice jars on the shelves, books by the window, and the quiet, deep kind of warmth that comes from something earned, not handed out. It was Christmas Eve. In the kitchen, Ava sliced apple cake, while Laura sat on the windowsill watching the sky. Michael stood nearby, holding a mug of tea. The room smelled like cinnamon and love. Outside, paper lanterns floated into the sky, carrying handwritten wishes from children and old souls alike. Laura leaned forward suddenly and shouted, "I think that one's mine. I wished for more hugs." Michael laughed and wrapped his arms around both her and Ava, pulling them close. The oven glowed. The night was quiet, and for once, the world felt perfect. Ava rested her head on his shoulder and whispered, "We used to wish for a miracle." Michael looked out the window and smiled gently. "Turns out," he said, holding them tighter, "you were the miracle I never dared ask for." And beneath a sky full of floating lanterns and soft snow, their little family stood wrapped in something more powerful than magic. Love, home, and a future built from both.
If this story touched your heart, you're not alone. Because sometimes the most powerful miracles don't look like magic. They look like a warm coat shared on a freezing night, like someone choosing to stay when they could have walked away, like a bowl of soup, a quiet smile, a soft place to rest. Here at Soul Stirring Stories, we believe in the quiet power of kindness, in second chances, in real people making real change one small act at a time. If you believe in that too, we invite you to subscribe. Join our community of kind hearts, people who still believe in love, hope, and healing. Because sometimes, all it takes is one story to stir your soul. Subscribe now and let the next story find you when you need it most.